Tonight, we're asking you questions about how to protect yourself from fraud, considering two stories in the headlines. First, police say a 26-year-old woman is one of the most prolific identity thieves they have seen in years. She's accused of stealing the personal information of at least 20 Toronto area women in just the past 2 years. John Lancaster has the latest on the CBC News investigation.
In the last 2 years alone, police allege Deborah Oguntiunbo has stolen the identities of more than 20 women.
She definitely would be considered a professional fraudster, knows what she's doing, and quite prolific.
Sergeant Andy Paddington of York Regional Police says their investigation alone uncovered a trove of alleged evidence.
As search warrants were executed, more evidence of frauds found. She was in possession of identification of multiple social insurance cards, Canadian government passports, driver's licenses, fraudulent checks, all with many different names on it.
CBC News has learned police in Halton, Peel and Toronto have also accused her of identity theft. Mississauga, Ontario resident Natalia Bozic is one of the alleged victims.
I don't feel safe with any bank.
Bozic says Oguntiunbo walked into this RBC branch on Don Mills Road and handed a teller a forged driver's license claiming to be Bozic. The bank issued a debit card, and Bozic also believed it may have handed over her social insurance number. In the next 5 days, more than 20 applications for credit cards, bank and car loans were made in her name, and the bad news kept coming for the 24-year-old.
A congratulations letter in the mail saying that I bought a Range Rover.
What went through your mind when you get this letter and open it, and what's...
Well, I was just thinking, what's next?
Next, police allege, was Oguntiunbo using Bozic's identity to lease a luxury condo in Markham. Bozic doesn't know how she was first compromised, but says her once good credit is destroyed.
Well, I tried to apply for a mortgage a couple months ago after the incident happened, and I was rejected. I have huge credit files under my name, and I can't afford anything right now because of my credit score after this.
CBC has refunded several $1,000s that went missing from Bozic's account, but the bank has declined to offer her ongoing credit protection. Despite her request, the bank says Bozic is partially to blame for this situation, suggesting her mobile device may have been hacked, something Bozic says happened after the bank fraud. Meanwhile, Oguntiunbo is behind bars awaiting trial in 4 jurisdictions on 50 fraud-related charges. John Lancaster, CBC News, Toronto. Carol?
John, thank you so much. Scammers are also using other methods to steal information from Canadians. The well-known CRA fraud has already built Canadians out of millions of dollars, and it's now getting more sophisticated. CBC News has discovered that the scammers are hacking police and government phone systems to make their fake calls look more like the real thing. Elizabeth Thompson has that story.
Scam artists are using phone numbers from more than a dozen federal government departments to defraud Canadians, and they're making it look like the calls are coming from real government agencies and police departments. Some of the calls tell potential victims their social insurance number has been compromised. Others are told they owe the government money and are in trouble. When the potential victim checks the number that called them, the scammers have spoofed it to show the phone number of the federal government department they claim to represent, like Service Canada, the Justice Department, the federal court. The scheme is so sophisticated that the scammers tell the victim they'll be getting a phone call from their local police department. Then, when the phone rings a few minutes later, the scammers have spoofed the local police number. Last week, scammers convinced Vancouver resident Andrea Van Noord to take $6,000 from her bank account and deposit it in a Bitcoin machine. She's unlikely to ever get it back.
I felt like an idiot. I felt completely invaded. I felt kind of dirty. I felt like this was very much my fault, and that I should have recognized the signs.
Jeff Thompson of the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre says Van Noord's not the only one. Since 2014, thousands of Canadians have fallen victim to the earlier version of the scam. Callers posed as Canada Revenue employees, claiming they owe back taxes. The CRA scam has defrauded Canadians of more than $16.7 million. Now Thompson says the scammers have branched out and are imitating other departments.
It's hitting lots of Canadians. So I mean, it's inundating police departments, and it's inundating us with a number of calls. So it's a huge impact. We've seen a huge spike in the reporting on this fraud.
The scam is also having an impact on government services. Departments like the Canada Revenue Agency and Service Canada say the real bureaucrats are bogged down answering phone calls from Canadians, checking to see if the call they got from the scammers was legit. That means slower service for all Canadians, even the ones who don't fall for the scam. Elizabeth Thompson, CBC News, Ottawa.
All right, those stories are among the most read online at cbc.ca. And among the most asked questions is along the lines of how do we keep this from happening to us? So joining me live tonight to take your questions on fraud prevention and cybersecurity is Claudiu Popa. Claudiu is a certified cybersecurity privacy expert and the author of the Canadian Cyberfraud Handbook. And Claudiu joins me live from Toronto. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a lot of questions tonight, so we're going to get right to it. Take a listen to Marcos.
They get the list of phones from somewhere. Otherwise, how can they know? So you can have my phone
How do they know, Claudiu?
Well, lists of emails, lists of names, lists of phone numbers are available all over the internet. So this is nothing new. The big issue is how do they decide on you versus someone else? Because this continues to be someone's time that is spent in calling you individually, right? So generally speaking, what they do to prioritize one victim over another is based on how much information they have about that victim. And so that's why a lot of victims are surprised to find that the caller will say, hey, you know what, let's validate the last 4 digits of your social insurance number or your credit card and so on. And that's how they establish trust. And that's how they put that victim on the defensive, right? And that's, from that point on, is just a matter of trying to cold read them and figure out what it's going to take to ask for as much money as possible.
Okay, Albert sent this question in on Facebook. Why are the telecom companies making it so easy to spoof a number?
So the telecom companies are in a great position here in Canada to do something about this. And in fact, the CRTC has decided that enough is enough, and by December, they're going to have to put some measures in place. So we're waiting to see what specific filtering measures are going to be made available by Bell, by Rogers, by TELUS, because we know that these things are coming down the pike. We're noticing that telcos in the U.S. are establishing their own systems, their own filtering mechanisms. But here, it's actually easier to do because you have fewer telcos, and these can communicate, and they can filter, and they can share lists of fraudulent scammers. So we're hoping to see something interesting. So watch this space in December.
Okay, in December. Okay, heard it here first. Sandra on Facebook asking, and this is the question that we saw over and over again online, how do we protect ourselves?
So to protect ourselves, we really need to anticipate the fact that, first of all, anyone can impersonate anyone else. This is not rocket science. Anyone can take someone's number and use a website. There's a number of free websites out there that will call and spoof any phone number. This is very, very easily done. So when a phone call comes in, just watch for 2 things. One, how it makes you feel. It's normal to feel stupid. It's normal to feel guilty if you've given money. It's normal to feel anxiety. These are normal things, but they should also be triggers to let you know that something out of the ordinary has happened. And that's when you need to have a process for these things. So if they say, I'm from the police, then you say, that's not a problem. I'm going to my local police station, and I will deal with this charge. I certainly won't be paying in Bitcoin or an iTunes card or a gift card. I certainly won't be making any kinds of payments like that. If it's the telco calling, then it's the same thing. I will be calling first thing in the morning, and I'll deal with this. Never make decisions on the spot and assume that everything will come with urgency. And when you see that they're pushing and that they're belligerent and that they're trying to intimidate, then that's a trigger that you should not just be aware of, but also your loved ones need to know about this. Seniors are particularly targeted with these things. So it's important to go through these things with them. It only takes a minute to let them know that these kinds of calls will come in. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Yeah, you say seniors are targeted. How do they know?
How do
they know that they're targeting a senior? Is it when they have them on the phone they figure it out, or do they have more information than just the phone number?
In many cases, they have more information going in and calling. In some cases, they target immigrants because of their names. In other cases, they see the age of the person because of the list that they have. And quite frankly, in other cases, they simply call and they cold read the person, and they can tell that someone maybe is answering more slowly or is harder of hearing or whatnot, and they immediately profile. So try to anticipate that kind of cold reading and don't give out any information.
Yeah, and don't give money over the phone right away.
Certainly not.
Yeah. Larry wrote on Facebook, what part of deposit money into a Bitcoin machine doesn't scream scam? Claudiu?
Right. So Bitcoin payments, iTunes cards, gift cards, any payment over the phone that is urgent, on the spot, even Microsoft support calls that ask you to give your credit card number over the phone. These are not legitimate. You were not planning on making a purchase or a payment at this time, this evening during the dinner hour. This is not part of the plan. Take a moment, take time to think about what's going on. Tell them that you're going to call them back tomorrow. There's nothing urgent about this. So any urgency should be rejected.
And if you say, I will call you back tomorrow, they won't give you a number to call back tomorrow.
So
or they might.
With respect to calling back, in no circumstances should you be calling back. So there's something called the callback scam. Don't call back that number.
Right.
Call back the number that they say they're from. So if they say they're from TD, you call the number that you trust at TD. Don't call the number that they're giving you. And certainly don't call the number that you see on your call display, because it might just charge you $10 a minute. It could just be a number that's likely going to incur charges.
Okay. Dave on Facebook wants to know, why is the RCMP not hunting these guys down?
Well, they are, is the truth, but everything comes with scale. So there are different types of fraud. There are millions of different types of fraud, and the ones that are incurring the highest losses are prioritized, and there's a finite amount of investigative and law enforcement resources. So this is important, but there's only so much that can be done with very little information about people who are anonymously calling over the internet, pretending to be someone else, pretending to be spoofing or impersonating someone else. It's a difficult situation for investigators, and the best way to do this is through prevention, through awareness, and through vigilance on the part of the victims.
Yeah, it seems some people are overwhelmed by these fraud calls. Take a listen to Alir.
But I see lots of fraud calls coming in, and I don't know what is going on with our federal government.
Okay, so what is going on? How come the scale is so high?
Yeah, no, this is actually a turning point. We're at an inflection point where we're going through a similar situation to what we saw when we went from spam to phishing. Right? So when we went from random, untargeted email campaigns to spear phishing campaigns that call you by name. So it's no longer a situation where we're using an elephant gun approach. Now we're seeing very focused attacks, and they're about to evolve into something very different, so voice mimicry is something that will be experienced soon, where imagine getting a call from a friend and that the number on the caller ID actually being your friend, but in fact this is someone impersonating their voice, automatically using a robocall. This is where this situation's going. So it's very important for the CRTC to apply pressure on the telcos to make sure that those changes are put in place right now, because the volume of calls, billions of calls, in fact 10 billion calls, we're talking about in 2018 alone,
wow,
have come through, and many of them do get blocked by a number of telcos, but it's important to step up those efforts because the technology and the sophistication is growing exponentially.
Okay, take a listen to this next clip from Jenna.
Is there a way that I know that the certain places I'm putting my information aren't leaking it to certain other places? I know that a lot of sites are actually owned by foreign countries, and I don't think that that's actually widely known to people. Like, for example.
Okay, Claudiu, is there a way to check whether your information is going to be compromised or not?
Well, there's a way to ensure that it doesn't get compromised, and that's to create a distinct digital identity every time you open an account. Right now, it's difficult to go to any website that doesn't say log in. Do you have an account? No, well, create one now. It's important to remember that you can create an email address for that account specifically. Now, this can be done very easily. You don't have to go through the sign-up process on Gmail, for example. You can use disposable email address providers, and that's easily Googled. You can create forwarders, and that can easily be done. So you're not actually compromising your main email address, which is very important because it's your central digital identity online. Once your email address is compromised, so many other things depend on it. So it's important to do that. It's also important to retroactively check whether your email address has been part of a data breach. So if you go to haveibeenpwned.com or HIBP, you can check to see whether any reported data breaches have included your email address. There's a number of things you can do, and the most important thing that you need to do is to realize that any piece of information that you submit, that you put out there, that you put into the cloud, goes into someone else's computer, potentially in a different country under different legislation. So you have the option to not give out your real identity, to create a new digital identity on the spot, and to make it expire. So there's a number of email addresses that are self-expiring, that will cease to exist. It's a good measure, and more people should be using it.
All right, and let's say worst case scenario, your personal information has been compromised. Patty wants to know this. How does the victim begin to pull her life back together and protect herself in the future? Let's take the first part of that. How do you pull your life back together if you've been taken advantage of and continue to be taken advantage of, and let's say the bank refuses to give you ongoing credit protection?
Yeah. So that credit protection, I don't know exactly how valuable it is. By law, everyone does get a free report once a year. There are 2 credit reporting agencies in Canada, so there's TransUnion and Equifax, and you can file paperwork to receive a credit report once a year from each. So if you space them out by 6 months, you'll have that kind of window. If you want to, you can also sign up with credit reporting monitoring, which is increasingly being done because everyone is part of a data breach somewhere, and so many companies are actually, like we've seen with Desjardins, for example, and Capital One, they're offering this to potential victims. So it's important to keep an eye on these things. But the hard part is when your social insurance number, when your unique government identifier is compromised. These are very difficult things to change, right? Because this is a permanent thing that should stay with you your whole life. And that's why we've seen other countries go to a model where these unique identifiers are changed easily because they're digital, because it's a more modern approach to uniquely identifying individuals. So this is why we should not give out our numbers, and this is why we need to know where they are in case they do get compromised without our knowledge.
Okay. Claudiu Popa is a certified cybersecurity privacy expert and the author of the Canadian Cyberfraud Handbook. Claudiu, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Canada's Supreme Court is deciding whether a class action lawsuit against Uber can go ahead. How workers are treated in the gig economy is an issue for many. Coming up, we'll explain the Uber case and put your questions on the gig economy to an employment lawyer. You're watching Ask CBC News.